All right, so this week we are talking about the pentagrams as promised last week. Mainly we're using the pentagram invoking banishment system here as an example of the error of intellectualizing. All right, so the Hermetic Path, that of the Kabbalah Magic Book and the Golden Dawn, is already a fairly intellectual path. It's really is a path for nerds, people who resonate very strongly with the planet Mercury or the god Hermes, people who tend to be very intellectual, very imaginative, who read a lot. And so it is a means of using the mind to some extent to reach enlightenment and to gain magical powers. But it is ultimately a way of going beyond the mind. And one of the problems with magic is that many people who get into it never seem to get out of their heads. And it's one of the traps of Hermetic magic is that a lot of the outward symbolism and the outward meanings are intellectual in nature. They're even somewhat scientific looking in nature. And that can lead you to believe that, oh, it's all about the science, and it's all about studying and reading and drawing abstract diagrams and exerting the mind to control the forces of nature and life, etc., etc. No, not really. That's more science. So let's talk about the error of taking magic intellectually. So in magic, there is a common principle, pretty much one of the most common principles involved in ceremonial magic is invocation and banishment. Okay, many people think they know what this is and how to do it. Well, there's an sort of an outer interpretation of invoking and banishment, and there's an inner interpretation. And it has to do with the sort of confusion that arises between invoking and evoking. And I have to say that as you advance through, let's say, the outer order of the Golden Dawn, you start to get some inklings of what reality actually is like beneath the surface. What happens to you is you begin to notice that there doesn't seem to be much of a difference between invoking and evoking, between invoking and evoking. What's the difference? Sometimes you're looking at it and it's like, I don't quite see how, okay, am I evoking something or am I invoking something? And even the standard definition of invocation and evocation, those definitions still don't seem to help, because experientially you're starting to see that there's not much of a difference. And we're going to get into that. Okay, so the standard definition of to invoke something is to bring something inside of you. And the standard definition of evoking is to conjure something outside of you, outside your magic circle. Okay, so if you want something to sort of possess you from the inside to come into you, that's invoking. And if you want to conjure something to visual appearance, like a spirit, then that's evoking. The problem is that when we do magic, a lot of times when evocation happens, it's happening in the imagination. Okay, so it's not necessarily materializing as a smoky entity outside the circle. It's happening as a perception of an image in the mind that's out there, like a hallucination or something like that. And then what seems to be happening is that, well, that's in me, isn't it? It's not out there. And there's this whole confusion between inside me and outside me starts to happen. And that's good, because that is the dualistic worldview beginning to unravel. okay? And so the confusion between invoking and evoking, that's usually a good sign, okay? And so we're going to go into the difference between invoking and banishing, and invoking and evoking, to show that there's a deeper sort of inner order meaning behind these concepts, okay? And the problem is, if you just approach them in terms of their dictionary definitions in your mind, in your head, you're just going to intellectualize all over them, and you really haven't experienced them yet. You really don't know what invoking and evoking is. You're just kind of pretending, faking it till you make it, sort of thing. And that is the difference between an initiate and a non-initiate. So most of the people most of the books you read on Western magic are written by non-initiates. They're usually in terms of the outer definitions of these concepts, okay? It's kind of what we talked about with blinds, okay? Most people who write about magic or speak about magic have fallen for the outer meanings of things. And those are the meanings that they're now bringing to talk about, as though these are the true meanings. Okay, so the outward meanings are more the illusions that we fall for as we get into magic, okay? And then the inner meanings start to come out, okay? I talked about this at length in terms of the double entendre and the bait and switch that happens in literature and in magic, okay, in the last video, okay? What that was basically talking about was the two meanings that we confront as we deal with magic. There's the outward meaning and then the inward meaning. And most people are stuck on the outsides of things, okay? That's why I think this channel resonates with a lot of people, because I'm continuously delving into the inner meanings behind things, speaking supposedly as an initiate, somebody who has experienced the insides of these rituals or symbols, or the astral world, and things like that. Okay, somebody who has a lot of experience with magic, and who hasn't spent a lot of time, not very much time, wasted in pursuing the external definitions. Okay. Anyway. So the problem with fixing things, so we go into magic and we say, well, this doesn't make any sense. I know how to, we can make this look a lot better. The Golden Dawn taught it this way. That's all hogwash. It's so irrational. Why don't we just fix it first? We'll fix it first, right? Okay, now it makes sense. Now let's practice. You can see the problem with that, because the outer appearance of things is something that you have fallen for, and now you're fixing the outer appearance of those things so that those outer appearances can no longer initiate you to the inner meaning anymore. So you're tampering with a system that could potentially, maybe, bring you to the inner order, but you're tampering with it so that it can no longer do that, because you're fixing it so that it meets your own rational intellectual expectations. Yeah, and you're usually doing that in terms of your own conditioning. Well, this is what I've taught makes sense, so I'm going to make this make sense before I make sense of it. All right. You can tell the message already is to leave the damn system alone and do the work so that you can experience the inner meaning. All right. Now, when it comes to revising systems of magic, I really like some of the revisions or some of the alternative takes. And it certainly means that I highly value having a flexible mind, the ability to see in terms of other perspectives, other systems, other configurations, okay, other constellations of the psyche that other systems use, okay? However, if you start referring to those alternative variations before you break through using the one system, that's coherent supposedly, then you're just going to be stuck on the outsides of things forever. Okay, you're jumping from one system to the next because, oh, this seems to make sense. No, I got tired of that. Let's go over to this system. This seems to work. Oh, let's combine these two systems. No. Okay, in order for a system to work, it has to have its own internal integrity. It has to have its own checks and balances, its own coherent system. And if you combine two systems of magic together, if you don't know what you're doing, then you can just muddle the whole thing up. And this is what most people are doing. It's like, well, I take a little bit of Golden Dawn, I take a little bit of Wicca, I take a little bit of Taoism, and I put these all together. Oh, and this is what works for me. Now beware that. Beware when people say, everyone's different, so that works for you, but I'm going to do it this way because this works for me. Very often, when an initiate hears somebody say that, what they're hearing is the manner in which I am perpetuating my suffering now, I can continue to perpetuate that by using this system. And that makes me feel pretty good. In other words, the clinging to my own self-importance that I'm doing now, this system helps me do that, and that makes me feel good about myself. And so there's no progress made, as you can hear. So you start to, if you create your own system of magic based on all these pieces and parts, you're basically, most likely, constructing something based on your own ignorance, based on your own misguidedness. And you're going to construct something that perpetuates the unenlightened state that you came into this whole thing with, to begin with. All right, I hope that makes sense. All right, so we talk about, this is the Golden Dawn system of the pentagrams and how to draw them in ritual so that they invoke and banish each of the elements. Pretty straightforward system. It tends to be that when you look at the pentagram, I guess logically speaking, the topmost point of the pentagram, it represents spirit. And then the other 4 points of the pentagram, each one of those represents one of the 4 elements. Okay, many of you know this, of course. And so the principle is that if you banish air, you start at the air angle and you draw away from it, and you just complete the pentagram from there. And if you are invoking air, you draw towards the air angle and you complete the pentagram from that point. Okay, and the same thing goes for all the other elements, except for spirit, because there's something special about spirit, which we'll get to. I don't want to spoil that. Now, there have been attempts to fix this. So we have the Orum Solus system of magic, which is pretty cool, by the way. I've got a couple of their guides. There's the Sword and the Serpent, and there's Mysteria Magica, I believe. The Sword and the Serpent and Mysteria Magica. Those are 2 books by the Magical Order of the Orum Solus. Those are 2 books that I have from those guys. And they have a rationalized and repaired system. So they looked at the pentagrams and they're like, no, let's do it this way. All right, so these pentagrams make a lot more sense than the Golden Dawn system. I don't really need to go into it. Just a little bit. They just assume that when I am invoking something, that I will draw the pentagram clockwise. And when I banish something, I draw the pentagram counterclockwise. And I still, respect, I pretty much favor the same point. I pretty much start at the same point as the element that I'm, invoking or banishing, okay? And that's it. That's how they do it, including spirit. So in other words, they invoke spirit from the spirit angle, from up above, okay? The Golden Dawn doesn't do that. which means that a Golden Dawn doesn't make any sense, right? And in the Golden Dawn system, if I go back, if I can go back, you can see that the invoking water pentagram is the same as the banishing air pentagram. Okay, so that's why many people say that doesn't make sense. They try to make sense, they try to rationalize it in strange ways, but it still doesn't make sense to them. So eventually they see this other pentagram system by the Orum Solus and they say, oh, this makes a lot more sense now. Okay, that's much more rational. Somebody fixed it, thank God, right? All right, well, let's take a look at the booby trap here. Somebody here has fallen for the outer appearances of things, okay? And it mainly has to do with that clockwise and counterclockwise principle. Uh-oh. I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for this video, I think. Okay, but let's talk about, first of all, let's talk about why we go into magical systems and we feel like we can't leave well enough alone and we have to fix them before we use them to fix ourselves. Okay, presumably we're doing magic, to make our lives better, to become enlightened. One of the outward trappings of magic, of course, is that we want power and control over our lives because we're out of control, and I don't know, and we want control. We want, self-respect and power, charisma, wealth. Sure, why not? And oh yeah, we want to be happy too. And we want to be enlightened. Oh, at least we think we do anyway. We think we want to be enlightened. And one of the problems is that we come to this whole spiritual path and we think that, well, it's spirituality is an intellectual pursuit. It's all like in your head. It's all in your brain, right? It's all in your head. Magic is all inside your head. And all these spirits you're conjuring, they're just inside your head. Okay, and I think we come to magic with that belief, even though we won't admit it to ourselves, the belief is still back there running the show. Okay, we come to this and say, well, I'm going to tweak my thoughts and my behaviors so that I become more successful or, something like that. All right, so why is the brain so stupid? Okay, so in Western culture particularly, we idolize the brain, don't we? Let's talk about how the brain evolved, just, basically. The human organism is basically a highly advanced feeding tube. Okay, so, the first life forms, the first animal-like life forms evolved as an intestinal tract with a mouth and an anus and a tube in between. And then the organism would feed on various things and then pass those products through its digestive system and then excrete them out the other end. Sort of automatically it would do that. Okay. Now, in order to do that, though, it wasn't necessarily good at finding things, of course, unless it had some kind of apparatus to seek out things to eat, things to digest, things to attack even, right? And so it developed a nervous system and a sort of attack system. Okay, so to go after prey and eat it, whether it's plants or other animals, okay? And in order to do that, this nervous system had to become increasingly sophisticated because other life forms out there were also developing nervous systems that were also becoming more sophisticated to evade them. So they had to become clever enough to catch them. Okay, and so we have this sort of escalating thing going on. Both sides are escalating. The predators are getting smarter, but the prey is also getting smarter. Okay, and so that makes creatures more and more and more intelligent, at least when it comes to evading predators or finding prey. Okay, so in other words, the brain mostly evolved so that we could find food and stay away from trouble. And as you know, people who are preoccupied primarily with just finding food and shelter and, avoiding trouble, that's not really that smart. That doesn't really show much of an appreciation for, art and literature and deeper meanings in life and spirituality, things like that. So we tend to assume that the more sophisticated the brain gets, the better we are able to experience deeper forces of life, let's say, right? That's kind of true, but remember that the brain evolved to basically just find things to eat or to run away from predators, okay? Obviously, I'm oversimplifying that, okay? And somehow in the process of all this, it also evolved the ability to appreciate things. How interesting. Mostly in us, okay? Other mammals apparently have the ability to do it too, and birds and maybe octopuses, maybe once the nervous system becomes sophisticated enough, other pursuits become possible. We could even learn to appreciate opera. Maybe. No, not me. Maybe Led Zeppelin. So let's look at examples of the brain not being too smart. Okay, so the brain goes in and tries to fix things. So if we're trapped inside our heads, we get all rational and say, well, this needs to be more efficient. That way, if everything's more efficient, then I can find food better. I can have shelter, reliable shelter. I can find a mate and produce offspring. I can evade predators. That's smart, right? Getting wealthy, getting rich, And so, yeah, we come up with more and more efficient ways of doing things. Okay, so one example of that is the metric system. We have in the United States, still, we use the old English system primarily, except in science, okay, which makes a lot of sense, by the way. The English system of measurement, which is like, inches and feet and miles, it's kind of unwieldy because the calculations you have to do to translate one unit of measure into others is difficult to remember. It's complicated. For instance, in the metric system, 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters. That's easy, right? And and 1 meter is 100 centimeters or 1,000 millimeters. Okay, so everything's in units of 10 essentially. Everything's divisible by 10, which makes calculations easy. Wow, so we fixed the whole system of measurement. Okay, that also goes for measuring temperature, like Fahrenheit and Celsius and stuff like that. So Celsius is the metric system, I assume, and Fahrenheit is the old system. Okay, but as it turns out, though, the systems of the English system of measurement and the Fahrenheit system of temperature, these things sort of evolved naturally based on our experience of the world, based on a culture, based on the way our human cultures were evolving at the time and continue to evolve now. Okay, and so those systems have a very organic feel to them. It's sort of they have a soul to them, whereas the metric system feels kind of soulless. It's very rational, it's very controlled, very simplified, very easy to use. Okay, somebody essentially has come along and simplified things. This is what the brain tends to do. It will apply abstraction on top of the world to fix it and to simplify it, to oversimplify it. And sometimes that oversimplification ends up killing it. Okay, so snuffing out the life or the soul of whatever it's trying to measure or control. I'm not saying that the metric system does that. but it does have a sort of soulless feel to it. And those who didn't grow up with the English system might not even understand that. They don't know what it's like. They don't know what that feels like. And they just look at it and say, you're just being irrational. It's like, yeah, I am being irrational, aren't I? Yeah. So in other words, to value things like soul, a soulfulness is not necessarily a rational thing, now is it? Another example of trying to fix things and ruining them is the Army Corps of Engineers. One example here, well, they find these meandering rivers, and they'll say, wow, that's so inefficient. Let's straighten that river. That'll be much better for our boats, so let's straighten that river and deepen it. And so one of the examples here in Florida where I live is the Kissimmee River. The Army Corps of Engineers came in and just straightened it. But okay, now it's like straight from this lake all the way to the sea or something like that, right? And in the process, they ended up destroying the ecosystem for miles and miles and miles around. Killed the land, essentially. And eventually they realized that, it's like, I think we just destroyed nature in the whole area. And I think one of the funny things is that, after they had done that, this is really kind of funny. Of course, nature is adapting. It's like, well, okay, the river's gone, so the nature starts to create new types of habitats gradually, as it recovers, right? But then, of course, the Army Corps of Engineers now goes back in and then forces the river to be winding again. Now, that's probably also going to destroy everything that nature's tried to do to establish life moving into that area again. It's really funny because they went in and straightened the river, killed everything. Life started to grow back, and so they said, "Oh my God, we made a mistake." And they go in and then they unstraighten the river, kill everything, and then life has to come back. Anyway, it's kind of ironic. Another example of trying to simplify things, okay? So you can superimpose a very simple abstract system on top of the world and sort of kill it, right? Well, you can also superimpose morality upon the world, and in the process end up damaging life. Okay, for instance, veganism. Okay, so veganism means eating only vegetables and fungi, no animal products. Okay. No animal products, except maybe the phytoplankton that grow on seaweed. I accidentally eat those. Oops. Right. In the process of doing that, what we find is that many plants, they have the nutrients, but we can't seem to get out those nutrients because the plants contain anti-nutrients that keep us from digesting them. And a more efficient means of getting the nutrients is through getting some meat in the diet, and eggs, and dairy if you can handle it, and fish, things like that, animal products. Okay, but in the effort to superimpose a sort of moral system of don't kill any animals upon the human diet, people end up hurting themselves. And they get sicker and sicker over years. It takes years, pretty much. Like if you adopt veganism now, you're probably going to feel really good for a while. Okay, well, depends, unless you have food intolerances for certain vegetables and fruits, which many people are developing now. But but you can feel really good for a while. But eventually, you get weaker and weaker because you have vitamin A deficiency and vitamin B12 deficiency, things like that. Veganism is actually really quite possible, though, as long as you incorporate a few ways of cheating in there, maybe shellfish or something like that, or eggs, or just cheat in a couple of different ways. And mostly you can do mostly vegetarian. Yeah, vegetarian diet is pretty good as long as you have some, animal products in there like eggs and fish and things like that. Anyway, that's an example of the mind, the intelligent brain trying to fix things. And in this case, imposing morality upon the world in an attempt to fix it because nature is so red in tooth and claw, and we need to eliminate all the murder from nature. This happens in education a lot. So an example of the brain getting full of itself, thinking, well, if I have the information, that's all I need. Okay, and this happens a lot in education, where they're like, the students getting the information, right? Good, they've learned. Next. It's like, well, acquiring information isn't learning. And this is especially true in magic. Initiation means change. It means a new way of life has begun. So in other words, to really learn something is to change, not to acquire information. Okay, so acquiring information about how pentagrams might work or could work, or some rational system of how they could work, that information is not the same thing as the deep transformation that's possible behind those systems. Okay, so the intellectual knowledge that we come into the work with is not necessarily going to help us. It's possibly going to screw everything up. Okay, because we don't realize the living nature, the soulful nature of the system that we're getting into. We intellectualize all over it. It's almost like you go into it and say, wow, this system is really irrational and it's all touchy-feely and it doesn't make any sense. Let's rationalize it, let's fix it, let's make it all make sense first, and then let's jump in and do it. Now it should work, right? Another example of a person who lives in his head, eventually in magic, yes, you will become your own teacher for the most part, okay? Or you will, you won't need a guru anymore, or you won't need to follow a curriculum anymore. You'll start making your own curriculum, okay? But the big mistake that people make is that when they first jump in, they say, I can make my own curriculum now. Yeah, I don't need to listen to anybody. I can do what I want, right? So, well, that might work, but usually not. No. Yeah, because if you're trying to achieve a change, the nature of which you don't even understand, and so why would you tamper with a system when you know you don't understand how it works? Okay? Don't try to make it make sense before you even understand the damn thing. Eventually, yes, you can become your own teacher. Even then, you're going to reach points where you're stuck. Okay, and that's why we live out in the world, because somebody's going to come along and nudge you and give you a hint, like, oh, I think I know. Okay, I think I know how I was screwing up. Okay, back on track again. Yeah, and those people aren't necessarily teachers anymore. Everyone becomes your teacher, and every circumstance becomes your teacher. Another example of the brain consciousness screwing everything up by simplifying everything, okay? And this should really be a no-brainer. When you go into magic and you have all these various god names and names of archangels and angels and things like that, there's a tendency to assume that when you see a word like Raphael, which is the name for the archangel of air, let's say, in the Golden Dawn system, right? But it's also the name for the archangel of, or let's say it's the name for the angel of Mercury. Okay, the archangel of Mercury is Michael. But wait a minute, Michael is the archangel of fire. Oh, you're saying the archangel of fire is also the archangel of Mercury? No. It is possible for two people in the world share the same name. There are other Liams in the world. There are even other Liams in the world with a Y, L-Y-A-M. Okay. So no brainer there. Just remember, like if you see the word Raphael, it's like it doesn't mean you're dealing with the archangel of air. You could also be dealing with the archangel or the angel of Mercury. Okay. Yeah. Now, Kabbalistically, the angel of Mercury and the archangel of air, they do share the same name. So there is some power supposedly in that name. So there is a connection between those two angels, or they draw upon a similar power source, maybe in the Hebrew letters, something like that, right? Yes, but they are two different entities. Okay, don't. Your brain is going to go in and try to super simplify everything. Okay, Raphael, there's only one Raphael. So in other words, if that name shows up here, it's the same entity that appears over here. No, you're oversimplifying things. Okay. All right. So the same thing goes for the pentagrams. It's like, well, to assume there's only one pentagram. So if the invoking water is the same as the banishing air, it's not. Okay, the invoking air pentagram is yellow, and the banishing air pentagram is yellow. The invoking water pentagram is blue, and the banishing water pentagram is blue. Those are different pentagrams. This is not rocket science, okay? So if they're being drawn in a similar way, it doesn't mean they're the same pentagram. Shouldn't be a problem with that, really. Okay, but somehow the mind doesn't like that. Oh, it's almost like the mind, you think, oh, this stuff really doesn't work anyway, so I might as well just tweak it to make it more rational for myself. I don't know what's going on there exactly. And of course, what's happening is that when you do this, you're following for the outward meanings of things anyway. Okay, so if I know that clockwise is invoking and counterclockwise is banishing, then I can apply the clockwise counterclockwise system to the pentagrams, and I should be just fine. It's not that simple. Don't fall for the outward meanings of things, because things are a little bit more complex on the inside once you experience them. Initiation is not intellectual. Initiation is getting out of your head, so that the intellect and all of the other bodily functions have been subsumed under the higher self, or the deeper self, the holy guardian angel. Okay, it's really kind of funny too, because we go into magic and we take charge of it and try to make it work for us, even though we know what's eventually required is submitting to the higher self, something like that. Okay, and what that means is that initiation is not in your head. Another problem with trying to fix the pentagram system, okay, so in the Orum Solus system, if you want to invoke spirit, you simply draw an angle towards the spirit, the spirit angle or something like that, and away to banish away from the spirit angle. It's a little more complicated than that. There's active and passive. But if you're doing something with the spirit, with spirit, you're using that spirit point. Okay, the Golden Dawn doesn't do that. That should be a clue. It's really unusual that the Golden Dawn would not even do that. So here are the Golden Dawn invoking pentagrams for spirit. Notice how they don't even really have anything to do with that topmost point. If that's happening in the Golden Dawn system, that should be cause for investigation, not a cause for saying, oh, this doesn't make sense, let's fix it. Amazing that people would actually do that. Okay, so we have the invoking active and passive forms of the spirit pentagram. How interesting. And remember that spirit is not an element. Okay, I know that in the Wiccan tradition they might say that, oh, the secret fifth element is spirit. There are 5 elements, right? There's air, earth, fire, water, and spirit. No, that is not true. Okay? Spirit is the essence of them all. And one way of looking at it is if you look at the standard Egyptian pyramid with the 4 sides on the top, each face of the pyramid is one of the elements. And the inward substance of that pyramid is spirit. So in other words, there really aren't any elements. Those are just the outward appearances of the spirit. Okay. What that means is no matter where you look, you're looking at spirit. Not only are you looking at spirit, but you're looking with spirit, and you're looking through spirit. Okay, so you cannot really invoke spirit by pointing at it, or by drawing an angle away from it, or whatever. Where would you point? It's everywhere. Okay, that's kind of the principle at work here. And so you can see that there's some kind of principle that's being hinted at. If you know anything about the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God would manifest between the 2 angels atop that ark. Okay, I don't know if you guys know that. You might have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay, supposedly the presence of God could be experienced in the empty space between the 2 angels. Okay. The same way in the Golden Dawn Temple, the spirit of God, or the Shekinah, manifests between the 2 pillars of the temple, and you can see there's 2 pillars there as well. All right, so so the spirit is not a thing that you can point at. It simply manifests, I don't know, among things, between things, as the Celts would say, betwixt and between. It's not something you can really point at. All right, so now we come to this idea of banishing counterclockwise and invoking clockwise. On the surface of things, this makes a lot of sense. Okay, but this is the outward appearance of invoking and banishing. Okay, the principle of this is really simple. Okay, and this is for people who have ancestry in the northern hemisphere. All right, in the northern hemisphere, the sun goes around us in a clockwise fashion. Okay, it rises in the east and then goes overhead, but it drifts to the south. Okay, so it goes to the south, and then it goes down behind us, let's say in the west, and then as it's under the earth, it goes to the north, and then it comes up in the east again, and then drifts to the south, then goes to the west and drifts to the north, and then comes up again in the east. Okay, so it's always going around us clockwise, no matter what season it is, because we're in the northern hemisphere. Okay, and the ancients recognized this because they lived a lot in the outdoors. All right, and so wow, all of the planets follow that same route. Okay, all Mercury, Venus, Saturn, all the visible planets were following that same route around the Earth, clockwise. And the idea was that these swirling currents around the Earth are causing things to appear on the Earth. They're causing things to manifest. That's the principle of astrology. Okay, and so to draw a circle clockwise means you're making something appear. Okay, so that makes sense. It's like I'm invoking it, right? So I'm causing it to appear. Oh, but wait a second. To cause something to appear, that's evocation. Uh-oh. What's invocation? So invocation is causing something to arise? Not really, no. All right, so clockwise and counterclockwise, you've also probably, if you're reading magical books, you're like, what are these weird terms? Sunwise is clockwise naturally because the sun goes around us in a clockwise fashion in the northern hemisphere. And Widdershins is counterclockwise. Okay, I think these are old Celtic words or even Gaelic words, right? Or Diusil and Widdershins, I think those are the Gaelic words, old English words for clockwise and counterclockwise. All right, and so in magical ritual, we tend to mostly circumambulate, walk around in a circle. We tend to circumambulate clockwise because we're going with the sun and we are manifesting things. To go against the sun is to go against the current of manifestation. Ouch. Ouch. Yeah, so we kind of want to go with the currents of nature. That way everything is sort of easy. In other words, we take advantage of the currents that are around us and we're going with things. We're going with manifestation, okay? To go against that doesn't mean you are trying to reverse that. Okay, because you have to understand what, if you walk counterclockwise or if you draw a circle counterclockwise, it's not that you're trying to go against nature or against the manifesting power of the sun. All right, so let's take a look at some examples from other traditions. You can see the swastika. Obviously, before it became an evil Nazi symbol, it was used in all kinds of cultures like Native Americans and also in Buddhism. It's basically a sun wheel, and it shows the whirling motion of life created by the path of the sun around the earth. It's that whirling. And in the Nordic condition, it was called the hammer of Thor. He throws his hammer and it goes like that, right? And so that power of life manifesting things, creating things. Okay, you can see on the Buddha's chest there, it is going clockwise, which indicates manifesting things, making things. It's good luck. It's like causing things to happen, causing good things to happen, bringing abundance. Creating abundance, creating things, not destroying things and making them go away. Okay, so naturally, if it goes in the other direction, counterclockwise, it's kind of like, it's now it's unmaking things, it's destroying things. Okay, well, not exactly. Now, very often in these Eastern traditions, the swastika is drawn counterclockwise on the head. Or on even the top of the head. It's like tattooed or, I don't know, inked there or something like that. And this indicates that, it doesn't indicate that the Buddha here is now against nature. It simply means he is unmaking himself. He's going to the root of himself. He's going back, functionally back to the root of himself to see how he arises. He's going to the origin of himself to see where he's coming from right now. So the mind sinks into meditation and goes behind the manifestation process. Okay, so it's going back to its origin. Okay, so it's not going against the flow necessarily. It's simply exploring itself back to its roots. Okay, and in a sense that involves unmaking himself, because he's seeing that he doesn't really exist. Okay, he's seeing through this illusion of manifestation, this thingness. He's seeing through the illusion of his separateness, and that involves sort of unmaking himself. It's not a difficult concept really, because if you see like the flow of a river, when you meditate, it's not like you're swimming against the current of that river. When you meditate, it's more like you are the sun reflected in the water, and that reflection of the sun on the water is now traveling upstream. The river still flows, but there's no resistance. You're simply exploring up to the source of the river now. You're going upstream to see where it comes from. Okay? There's no resistance. There's no swimming against the current. None of that. Okay? It's simply shining a beam of light, looking for where the river comes from. Trying to find the spring boil or where it comes from or something like that, right? Trying to find the source. And so that's the way reverse circumambulation can be seen. So if you draw circles, or if you draw circles that are counterclockwise, or if you walk counterclockwise in your magical space, that's not you necessarily swimming against the current. It's simply you dissolving your perception of everything around you and seeing through the manifestation process, okay? It can be seen as sort of dissipating a force, but not going against nature, okay? All right, so the outer meaning of the clockwise direction is to invoke, and the outer meaning of counterclockwise is banish, okay? Because if you are going clockwise, you are creating new things, so it makes sense, seems like you're invoking, right? Because you're bringing things into your life, right? And counterclockwise, you are banishing, they're making them go away. Well, this is not true. It's actually like this. When you go clockwise, you make things. That's pretty much established, right? Because as the sun goes around the earth, things grow, things come into being, things keep coming, right? And go counterclockwise, if you go against that, it's more like unmaking them or seeing them before they, what they were before they existed, okay? And what this means is that clockwise, if you're making something, you're also banishing it. We know this to be true if we really do magic, okay? If you do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram on a regular basis, those demons don't go away. They get pushed out to the periphery of your circle and become stronger. You are creating them, actually. This is why we walk clockwise when we do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. And this is also why counterclockwise and clockwise don't really matter for invoking and banishing. Uh-oh. But I'm going to have to clarify some things in regard to that, okay? But keep in mind, so when you banish something, you are intensifying the separation between yourself and it out there, which makes you stronger in here, at least in your perception, and the illusion of that thing out there also becomes stronger. So you're helping it come into existence. Banishing it pushes it out into a more solid form, okay? If you don't do that, it's less tangible and it's capable of taking you over, okay? The cool thing about banishing, though, is that you push it out into that more recognizable form so you can see it as it pops up and it can't take you over anymore. How cool is that? It still is annoying, though, and your life can get worse before it gets better when you're doing banishings, okay? But when you banish things, you kind of make them come out stronger, okay? This is not that difficult to understand, because if you try to banish a thought from your mind, what happens? It gets stronger. Okay, that's how banishing tends to work. Does banishing protect you from negative influences? Not quite. It makes you better able to see them out there so that you can stop them in their tracks. It's like, I see you. You were trying to take me over, nasty little demon. And it's like, oh, you see me. And it freezes because now it can't take you over if you notice it. Okay? And of course, then it's going to persist out there, and eventually it's going to dissolve because it can't do anything anymore, right? So yes, banishing does work, but it doesn't work in the way you think it does. It doesn't work according to the outer meaning or definition of it. The experiential aspects of banishing are quite different. All right. Counterclockwise means invoking. So in order to invoke something, you draw counterclockwise? Well, if you go counterclockwise, you're essentially unmaking yourself. You're pretty much seeing through the illusion of your separateness, okay? That means dissolving the circle that you have drawn around yourself. It kind of dissipates, and you become one with everything. if that happens, all of the potential forces out there are just kind of gone now, but they exist only as pure potentiality, which means they now exist inside you and can take you over. That's why, yeah, that's why invoking and the counterclockwise direction go together better. Okay, this does cause some problems though, okay, but I can clarify. So to invoke is to kind of undo your defenses, to drop your defenses and let that powerful force take you over, okay? You only want to do that with super spiritual forces, not, demons or lesser spirits or anything like that, okay? Because you want to do it with forces that are all pervasive, pretty much. So you drop your boundaries against them so that they come in and now can take you over, okay? And with that, when you do that, the whole universe becomes visible through the eyes of that particular entity, okay? I'm going to clarify this a little bit more, okay? All right, so many people argue that, well, in the Golden Dawn teachings, it basically says when you want to invoke a force, you draw a clockwise circle, or it's like for a talisman, let's say, right? You're consecrating a talisman, you want to invoke something into that talisman, you draw the invoking circle, okay? And if you want to banish something out of the talisman, then you draw the counterclockwise banishing circle. No, they're still using the external terminology for that. This is really tricky, okay? So essentially, when you have a talisman out here and you want to draw a force into it, they call that invoking, okay? But it's actually evoking. Remember, when you evoke, it's the same as the banishing direction. So you want to draw that sunwise circle around it, because what you're really doing is you're causing something to crystallize. It's actually evoking because it's happening out there in the talisman. All right. If the talisman itself were doing the ritual, it would do an invocation, right? But you're not doing that. Okay, you're causing the force to go into that, so materialize in the talisman. Okay. So yeah, it can be kind of confusing. If you want to bring a force into yourself, let's say an archangelic force or something like that, then fine, you would invoke. But to do that, you could actually dissolve the circle around yourself and just unite to the power of that angel. Okay, which is tricky. Okay. All right. So anyway, consecrating oneself, consecrating a talisman. All right. So and you can still use the same terminology. Okay, the invoking circle. It's not really an invoking circle. It's really an evoking circle. Anyway. So anybody who's doing the Kabbalah magic work, you're starting to get a blueprint for how an actual magical operation works. Okay, and this is kind of backwards from how most of us tend to look at it. So you begin by banishing. Okay, so you're removing forces from your circle and putting them out there. Okay. Then you invoke something, and that's can be done through the middle pillar or something like that, right? And then to invoke something is to essentially dissolve the boundaries between you and it, so it now just permeates your whole being. Okay, you might not necessarily feel anything. Okay, you might. Okay, but so the point is to now see the universe through the eyes of that being. Okay, so and you actually you just become one. Let's say you're invoking Mercury, so you become one with the Mercury universe, the way that universe appears to Mercury. Okay, so that's just everything is now Mercury, Mercury, Mercury. Everything all around you, everything's seen in terms of Mercury. Okay. And that gives you the authority supposedly to produce various manifestations of Mercury out there through evocation. Okay. And then towards the end of the magical operation, then you can then banish those forces of Mercury so that they're no longer inside you anymore. They're back out in the world. Okay. Really interesting too, because after the magical operation happens, you're going to get more powerful manifestations of your magical work out there in the world because you've now banished them back out there. Okay. Which means that the results of your work really appear to be more outside your circle than more pronounced afterwards. They get stronger. When most people think that, oh, well, now when I do my magical work, I just forget about it and nothing really happens. But that's not the experience that many magicians have. It's like they go through the world and it's like, wow, I'm getting all kinds of results from my work, but it's not happening inside my magic circle. It's happening at other times when I'm not doing my work. So when you invoke something, you might not really feel or see very much. It's when you banish it back out into the world again that you start to see it, because then the results are now pushed out there and forced to manifest between you and it. Okay? Yeah. Okay, this might explain why, magic works the way it does. And this is why I can often tell, people would tell me about, during ritual I had all these amazing experiences. I'm like, it's really more about what happens outside of the temple, really, that determines, whether the magic is working. This doesn't mean you can't experience amazing things, especially in regard to invocation. Okay? But that's mainly in regard to, dissolving the barrier between yourself and this other universe out there and having it fill you up. You can have some amazing experiences that way, okay? But the really cool stuff happens after the banishing's done and everything's pushed back out into the world again. Then you begin to notice, oh, these are the results of my work. How cool. Okay? Now, does this mean you need to revise the way you're doing magic because of all the stuff I just told you? No. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to do that. In this video, I've just given you a taste of what happens between the outer experience of the meaning of something, the textbook definition of something, and then the inner experience of how things actually work. It's quite different. All right. So this is just a glimpse of what is possible on the inside. Okay, like as the adept starts to experience things. Okay, now the adept will still speak in terms of, I draw a clockwise circle to invoke, but then they kind of think about it. It's like, I think I'm actually evoking, aren't I? It's like, well, whatever. Like, because the actual inner experience is quite different of what you're actually doing. Okay, so remember, don't just fall for the outer definitions of things. Just keep going, keep doing the work, and eventually you'll start to notice how things really work. And this is why, when people talk about their experiences of magic and they try to portray themselves as an adept, the adept can very often tell that, that's not it. Because many of the definitions of various magical concepts are backwards when viewed from the inside, from the inner order. Okay, this is why magicians are said to live backwards. Everything's upside down and backwards in the inner order. Okay. I'm kind of tempted not to read any of the comments on this video because I'm sure I'm going to get an earful of confusion and backlash. But remember, this is just a taste of the kind of stuff that can happen. And it doesn't mean that you're going to revise your magical system the way that I'm talking about. It means you need to start tuning in to the real stuff that happens in magic on the inside of these, how these energies actually tend to work. Okay. Start looking for the real interpretation, your own interpretation, and eventually you'll make your own system that will be revised, but it's going to be based on initiation and inner experience, not just what you think is rational in your head. Okay. And one more thing. If you're like me, I'm a Gemini sun, very very intellectual, very thinky. It's difficult to get out of the head, right? To become an initiate and not think in terms of only brain consciousness. One of the easiest ways to get out of your head is to, what you could say, meditate. Many people make a intellectual, mental thing out of that anyway, and they can't do it. Become a romantic with a capital R. Okay, so in other words, the romantic literary movement. Okay, maybe I'll talk about this sometime. The Romantics pretty much rebelled against the very dry intellectual scientism of the 17th century, 17th and 18th century. They rebelled against the hyper-rationalism and the hyper-empiricism, and they asserted that it's not the brain consciousness that is Lord and King of everything. It's actually something else, and they would even say it's the heart that is the king. Well, but that does come as a remedy. So if you become a romantic and you read romantic poetry, romantic literature, things like that, I can recommend a few authors for you, okay? And then that can come as a remedy so that you can get out of your head and stop trying to fix everything and simplify everything and rationalize. Stop trying to make everything make sense. Let it be irrational. Let it be organic. Let it be alive. Let it have soul. Let it have its complexity. All right. Until next time.